back to this week's episode of AMA Friday with Amy Miller, Recruiting and Yoga Pants. All right, so pretty cool topic to dig into this week, but very quickly, I just feel like I have to point out that my daughter, who is super into cosplay, my youngest daughter, and stagecraft and stuff, bought this really cool lighting kit. So she's got like all these fancy lights and there's like a backdrop and green screen and stuff. So I'm playing with her lights a little, and so I move things around a bit to see how we're doing. Maybe Room Raider on Twitter will give me a solid 7 out of 10, you think? I don't know. Maybe we'll find out. Okay, so digging into this week's topic. This felt appropriate coming off of last week's discussion about feedback. I want to dive in a little bit to how hiring decisions are made. Some of y'all aren't going to like this because it kind of busts the narrative a little bit. So we'll see how this goes. There are definitely some myths and some people have a funny way of looking at these things. I think a lot of people think that hiring decisions happen kind of on a whim, based on how someone feels on a certain day, if the manager likes you or not. I mean, look, I'm not going to try to pretend I know how every single company on the planet hires. I can only speak to what I've personally experienced, what I know to be true, and the places where I have worked. Fortunately, I've worked for some larger companies in the last several years. I believe we do have a very methodical, data-driven process. I have also worked for smaller companies, not so much. And so a lot of times in that case, it really is important for recruiters, HR, business leaders, anyone involved, to make sure that we're kind of sanity checking those decisions and that we are making hiring decisions with the right data, that we're thinking about this in the right way through the lens of diversity and inclusion, fairness, what's best for the business. All of those things are very important. So we can argue about that another time. Y'all can, go nuts in the comment section if you are so inclined and tell me how messed up it is everywhere else. But let me speak to you from my experience. That's what this channel is all about, y'all. Just trying to demystify things 1 week at a time and what I've seen happen and what I personally know to be true. So, hiring decisions rarely are done in a vacuum. These are, for the most part, very consensus-driven discussions. So it starts with setting up the interview panel. Most companies will require some kind of training. So one of the first things that you may do as a new leader joining a company is go through their version of interview training. There's usually sometimes it's really super formal. Sometimes it's just more like, hey, here's some best practices we want you to think about. But there is typically some sort of company specific structure in how they want interviews to be done. This could be you're going to focus, 50-50 on role-related knowledge and technical competencies, and the other half is going to be like culture fit type stuff. We use the STAR method, so situation, task, accomplishment, result, action, result, situation, task, action, result. I say this every day. You think I would know what it stands for? Very common methodology a lot of companies use, behavioral-based questions, tell me about a time when, things like that. So there's a very methodical way of gathering the data. We're asking you these questions because we know that there are certain pieces of information that we need to input to have a discussion to make a decision. Okay, so that's number one. The interviewers should be trained or guided into a particular way of developing data. The second thing that happens in most big companies, and really some small companies too, feedback is blind. And what I mean by that is, as an interviewer, let's just say you're interviewing with 4 different people, okay? Series of one-on-ones, most likely. Don't really care for panels much myself, but interviewer B has no idea what interviewer A came out of the meeting with. They don't know the hiring decision. Everyone makes a decision based on their experience with you and the information that they have gathered and what they have come out of their interview with you with. Okay, so what I mean by that is, let's say I'm interviewing a software engineer and my role is to determine this person's technical expertise. So how well can they code? And I might, test them on a particular data structure. And then the other thing is, I want to probe for teamwork. I want to know, how do they work on a team? So I may have them do some coding, and I may ask them questions like, tell me about a time when you disagreed with a group decision, and what did you do? You were told to do a certain project and you didn't want to, or whatever. So I'm going to gather data based on those focus areas, based on those questions. I am going to, independently of anyone else on the interview loop, make a recommendation. It's not a decision, it's a recommendation. So based on those factors, based on my questions, based on the data that you're giving me, I'm going to go in with a vote. I'm going to say, yes, I think this person is great because of these reasons, or no, I think this person is not a fit because. And so I need to be able to defend my decision with data. Okay, so you have all the people involved that do that. And so the next thing that happens is we all get together and talk about it. Okay, so that may be a discussion that happens over email. That may be everybody gets in a room together or on video together, given that we're all still in a freaking pandemic. But there is typically some sort of discussion that takes place. Now, in a lot of companies, the hiring manager may or may not have veto power. Sometimes they do, usually not. Usually it does need to be a consensus-driven decision. So everybody gets together, they all finally get to see each other's feedback, kind of get to see how did the day go as a total, and they pull together all that information to make a decision. So now, another thing that's worth pointing out here, y'all, these decisions are typically not unanimous. That's the weirdest thing, I think, for people to wrap their heads around, is it doesn't always have to be like 100% pass or fail. You may have great interview, 3 out of 4 or 4 out of 5, and there's one that just really went poorly. Depending on how the rest of the interview went and how, when you take the sum of those parts, and does this person solve the business problem we have here, or does this person fit the role, or are the things that we're maybe lacking, are they things we can train or ramp up on, you could still come out with a hire decision. Which is awesome, because who wants to have like this 100% pass fail thing? That would be terrifying, right? You have to impress everybody and not just most people. So just keep in mind that these decisions are not taken lightly, and there is no algorithm. There is no like magical, oh, well, they got enough questions right, so that means we can make a hire. It is a conversation. It is a well thought out decision based on a robust discussion of all the information, okay? This leads into my final point, and it kind of goes back to that feedback discussion. Y'all are not going to change anybody's mind. Now I want you to sit with that for a minute, because I will, a lot of times have to be the bearer of that bad news. If somebody's not getting an offer, guess who gets to call them and tell them that? It's me. Even though I was not involved, I usually am involved on some level though. I'm at least part of the conversation, or tracking the conversation, or like, but what about? Did you think about? What about? I admit, I can have some level of involvement. However, the final decision, as I've mentioned, is done through discussion, debate, and a consensus-driven process. So when that decision is made, and I then have to relay that for whatever reason it was a no, people get really annoyed because I can't give you feedback, okay? I do understand that feedback is necessary for our growth, for our improvement for us to know what to study or do better next time. I understand that. But a lot of times when I have in the past tried to give feedback, I very, very often get pushback. Like if I were to tell you, this particular, the data structures and algorithms is a little rustier than we would have hoped. We were looking for, a little better coding. Okay. How many times do you think people will argue with me about that? Now, how many times do you think I've taken said argument back to the hiring team who spent all this time discussing and say, well, they don't think you are right. They think you're wrong for this reason or that reason. And that resulted in us overturning a hire decision. 0? Great guess. You're absolutely right. I understand that may not be the feel-good story of the week. And I know that that may frustrate you more than anything. But I need you to understand, just like I said last week, it's not personal. And it is a business decision based on the information that we have gathered, based on the discussion about what we need, both for the company as well as for the team. And these are not simple yes, no, pass, fail, how do I feel today decisions. These are serious, serious conversations that are happening typically with very senior people who take hiring very seriously. Okay, so if y'all take nothing else from this week, I know this isn't the rainbows and lollipops video that maybe you want, but it's an honest one. So don't give up, okay? I don't want to ever make anyone feel like they shouldn't try, because we want you to keep trying, and we will dig into interview prep again. I think that's going to be next week. We did an earlier video on prep. I think this is now an appropriate segue for next week to dive into a little bit more about interview prep, how to bring your best self to that discussion, and how to make sure that you're leaving leaders with the right data and information for them to say yes. All right. As always, drop me a comment, shoot me an email, amy@recruitingandyogapants.com. We will see you next week.